Hi everyone, and welcome to this Black History Month event, Balancing the Equation. My name's Alex Lathbridge. I'm a doctoral researcher in biochemistry at the University of Bath, and I am genuinely really excited about this event because it looks at some amazing things. But what I'm really excited about is the fact that there are so many black faces in the crowd, because usually when I'm here, that isn't the case. What I said in doing this, I said, I want enough black faces in the crowd that one, I feel self-conscious about my haircut, and two, I wanted enough in here that we'd make some very old white men with antiquated views, like turn in their graves, and then we could use that as like a renewable energy source. So what interests me most about science in Black History Month is that we don't really talk about the effects that black scientists, black scholars have had on science. You know, for every Florence Nightingale, Richard Dawkins, James Watson, there are an equal amount of amazing scholars whose names we don't know. For instance, one of my favorite examples is Francis Williams, who was an 18th century scholar. He was known both in Jamaica and in England as a man who was afforded education that was usually reserved to white people. Despite this and his scholarly exploits in mathematics and verse, he was still denied entry to the Royal Society. He wasn't able to be elected to it. I've been told by the RI that if it were them, they'd definitely let him in. But we could spend hours and hours talking about the work of many black scholars. And I think today, what's amazing is that we're going to be hearing from some amazing speakers where we're going to be talking about the past, present, and future of science and how it affects black people. So, without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to your first speaker. Now, Lisa Kennedy, she's the Assistant Curator at the Science Museum. She recently spoke at the Museum of London's 10 Years of London, Sugar and Slavery Gallery, Reflections and Responses, proposing how the subject of history, and museums especially, could engage with young people. So please join me in welcoming her to the stage.
Hi, everyone. I see you guys up there. My name is Lisa Kennedy, and I work at the Science Museum. And I'd like to speak to you today about how museums have a whitewashed history. Now, before delving into the subject, I'd like to draw your attention to the definition of whitewashing history, because I think it's important to understand a term before using it in different contexts. So, according to Cambridge, act of whitewashing involves an attempt to stop people finding out the true facts about a situation. Now, I've come across an editorial in Nature titled "Science Must Acknowledge Its Past Mistakes and Crimes," which refers to the discussion about the removal of statues of problematic figures such as Cecil Rhodes, James Marion Sims, and Christopher Columbus, in which the article alludes to the removal of these statues as, I quote, running the risk of whitewashing history. But I think this is an incorrect use of the term, as this is not an example of whitewashing history. It's the removal, as the removal of these statues does not correspond to the deliberate omittance and erasure of said people from history entirely. In fact, the misuse of this term actually runs the risk of downplaying an attempt to apply new understandings to these influential figures and rethinking our current memorialization of such figures. Now, going on to slide 2. Speaking of influential figures, this is a quick Google search of influential scientists according to Google, and as you can see, there are many white faces, often which are white men, and with this, there's often going to be a grand narrative about these men and their contributions to science. But my question is, why is that the only focus, and what's missing and who's missing from these images? I believe that this is due to the construction of whiteness, in that it's been equated as the norm and has manifested in ideologies and institutions in which uphold this framework as the status quo. But what do I mean by the construction of whiteness? Well, according to Richard Dyer, white makings of whiteness within Western culture has been possible because white people have had so much more control over themselves and indeed of others. But how has this been achieved, you may ask? Oh, there it is. So starting from the Age of Enlightenment, this was not only a period of Western scientific and technological advancement, but also ran parallel alongside the European discovery of the New World and the later conquest of various countries. And this superiority complex of white supremacy was not limited to colonial agents, but also prominent scientists that are often missing from our interpretation and memorialization of such figures. For example, Charles Darwin in Descent of Man and Selection in relation to sex stressed the inferiority of the Negro and Australians as synonymous with gorillas, whereas James Marion Sims, a pioneer of modern gynecology, experimented on numerous black women and children operating without anesthetic under the racist notion that black people didn't feel pain. But how is this connected with museums? Well, many museums in the West were born from the looted collections of exotic objects in which unique specimens, plants, technologies, and bodies from colonized countries were taken. And these actions of stealing and exploitation channeled this entitled superiority complex, which revealed itself in both museums and science institutions and teachings. So from this really brief introduction that surrounds this question, I've suggested that museums and science have a whitewashed history based on two counts. Firstly, the construction and maintenance of whiteness as the norm, and secondly, the control of what information, narratives, stories, and facts are included or excluded in the histories of museums and science. So what next? This slide. I've proposed 3 suggestions to counter the whitewashed histories of museums and science. And as I'm speaking, I'd like to really take a look at some of the people on the screens and look at what they've contributed to science in the past and present. So firstly, in order to counter the whitewashed histories of museums and science, we have to acknowledge that museums and science have a whitewashed history. And we have to understand that in which the construction of whiteness has been equated to the norm, in which subsequent history has been formed in a narrow lens in which white scientific achievement has been sustained by museums, science, and other educational spaces. Within that, we have to understand that there is a continuance in which whitewashing occurs. And I find this is the case when museums and other institutions focus on the fact that they only want to speak about Western science, from a Western perspective. And I want us to really break down that response, because what does that mean? Does it mean from a geographic perspective or one synonymous with whiteness? And thirdly, I'd like to suggest that we should all take the time to do some research, because these people are out here, and 2 of them, Dr. Faith Uwade and Professor Christopher Jackson, I found on Twitter. So if I can find them on Twitter, you can find them if you have the resources of institutions such as museums and science behind you. But it's only going to happen if you want it to happen. So that's my 3 suggestions. I'm not saying that information is easy to find, because it's difficult, but there is help out there, and you can seek expertise and guidance from the Black Culture Archives, the Museum Detox Network, and Minorities in STEM. But if you do approach people or organizations, please respect their time and don't expect this guidance and expertise for free. So from this really brief introduction onto how museums and science have a whitewashed history, I hope I've displayed how the different layers in which whitewashing can occur, and some working principles in which we, as well as institutions such as museums and science, and people who work within those institutions, can contribute to the countering of whitewashing history. Thank you.
That was really good, thank you. And I'm very glad the RI have shifted that slide, because I was going to say, why am I not on that list? I'm on Twitter, I'm influential. So our next speaker is Dr. Segun Fatumo. He's currently a senior scientist at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, the Uganda Research Unit. Now, his research largely focuses on the genetic basis of cardio-metabolic diseases in Black Africans, and presently on transgenerational genomic impact of PTSD in Rwanda. So please welcome him.
So thanks, Alex, for the introduction. So hello, everybody. My name is Segun Fatumo, and today I'll be talking to you about my science and the experience of other Black scientists in the UK. So the title of my presentation is Genomic Medicine in Diabetes. How can we balance the equation? So the term genomic medicine means the use of genomic information in an individual or a group of individuals to make decision, to make either diagnostic decision or treatment decision. In 2012, noncommunicable disease killed 38 million people worldwide. 38 million people is equivalent to the population of Denmark, Belgium, Sweden, and Greece combined. This figure also represents close to 70% of all death in 2012. It is projected that this figure will continue to increase annually. A study in the UK shows that at least 50% of Black minority in the UK will have this disease before the age of 80. This is compared to 1 in 5 of white population. The cause of this is not known. So we think a scientific approach, a very fantastic one, called genome-wide association study might provide insight. So genome-wide association study, GWAS, we think it will provide an insight to the cause of this. In 2009, all the studies that have been done all over the world using the approach I've mentioned about have been mainly done in the white European population, 96% of them, with a slight difference in 2016 of 81%. You just see a minor studies have been done with African population. The implication of this is that genomic medicine will benefit just the privileged view, because the finding does not always translate to other ethnic groups. So in our group, we decided to undertake a study and looking at some Black participants. So we conducted GWAS in 14,000 Black participants from Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, Uganda, and South Africa. As you can see from this picture, on the x-axis, you'll find the chromosome from chromosome 1 to chromosome 22. On the y-axis, you'll find a p-value that shows whether a variant is significant or not. If you look closely at chromosome 16, you'll find some variants in a gene called HBA1 that are associated with diabetes. This variant is very common in African population and absent in the white European population. What this means is that if only the European population participants are being used for study, we are not likely going to find this. So the implication of this study is that the way HbA1c is used as a tool to say whether you have diabetes or not might change in the future. I must say that this study is a collection of a team of very diverse scientists led by my boss, who is an Asian, and many people from America and also some white scientists. Ironically, that is not always the case. Several studies have shown that science is perceived to be white, male, and middle class. And this is everywhere. So when I tell people that I'm a scientist, they think about Freddy Sanga. They don't see me as a scientist. You can see from the presentation of my colleague. You see, when you talk about a scientist, people think about white, male, and middle class. So this culture and this message has been reinforced in many science classes in the UK. Now, in this diagram, if you look at the bar here on the left here, the UK population, the black minority and other minority in the UK represents about 14% of the whole population. So we have 14% of the whole population in the UK. The second bar here that shows 19% shows that we are already overrepresented in higher institutions. What that means is that many black people, many minority people, they always want to get their degree in the university. So we are overrepresented in the university because we are even more than 40% in the university. If you look at the third bar, you can see that in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, we are even more overrepresented, 20%, 20.5%, meaning that many black and minority in the UK want to study either science or mathematics or technology or engineering. But unfortunately is that when it comes to employment in scientific workforce, the figure dropped down. You see, we are only 10%. Why? How can we balance the equation? Now, this figure also shows that in 3 years consecutively in the UK, British University employ no black academic in top position. You can see here, for this bar here, you see mainly white people, and black here is zero for 3 consecutive years. In 2013 and 2014 session, 2014-2015 session, and 2015-2016 session. So why? So how can we balance this equation? The little ones that are employed in scientific workforce and other places, these are their feelings. Many people feel neglected. They feel people overlook them. They feel discriminated against. When they see you, you are not recognized as a science person. Many people see you as a representation of a stigmatized group. Roughly 1 in 10 of black and minority people that describe their workplace as being they are not being welcome in their workplaces. An Asian woman, which is surgeon, she said in one study that people look at the color of her skin and automatically they start doubting you. You go for an interview and they look at you, you are black, and they already think that you don't know what you're doing. People have preconception idea about what I'm capable of doing. Let me tell you a story. In 2016, when I had the opportunity of ever coming to Europe, I went to Germany to study. At the University of Cologne, I met a guy who was very nice and welcomed me, and we had a chat for a couple of hours. I already told him that I study computer science, my first degree, computer science, my second degree. When I requested from him to allow me to use his computer to check my email, do you know what he asked me? Do you know how to use computer? That is a shame. So people feel that teachers express low expectation for minority ethnic group in classes. Consistently, lower expectation for black students than for Indian and other minority. And this negative feeling affects you and what you are able to do in the future. In the UK, we have so many policies. We have very, very fantastic policies. We have equality and diversity policy. So we like to say that we want to be fair to everybody. So we always say you have to be fair. Give opportunities to everybody. When you give the same opportunity to everybody, we don't have the same outcome. So in reality, this is what we say. We want to give the same opportunity to everybody. But in reality, we give more opportunity to those who already have the opportunity. We give the best opportunities to those that had the opportunity of going to Cambridge and Oxford and all that. I'm proposing that we should give opportunity to those who really need the opportunity. Before I finish, this is my advice for everyone that is aspiring to be a scientist as black or minority. This picture It's me, not my true picture, but it's who I used to be about 24 years ago. Just before I did my GCSE, or equivalent of GCSE, in Lagos, Nigeria, I was on the streets of Lagos, hawking all kinds of things. I had this background as a person. There are so many people everywhere that had similar background, that had something that affected them, that would not allow them to be able to be who they want to be. So my advice to such people is that there will always be challenges. There will be many of them. Your limitation, as they may call it might be your color, it might be your limitation, it might be your race or your background, or even your accent. You should never allow those limitations to stop you. Don't throw a pity party around yourself. Believe in yourself. And when the going gets tough, you just keep on going. This is my advice for you. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for that, Segun. I feel very much like I've just got a pep talk from my dad. And so our final speaker tonight is Riham Sati. Riham, she's a multi-award-winning business leader and entrepreneur. Originally, she was a researcher in clinical neuroscience. With her work, it involved modeling and understanding the human brain using neuroimaging techniques. In 2014, she co-founded Mivite, a data-driven cognitive recruiting system that makes intelligent and personalized hiring decisions. Welcome.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Riham Sati, CEO and co-founder of Mivite, and with the neuroscience background, I have to have a few slides about brains and evolution. So, without further ado, there we go. So, over millions of years, our brain size has increased, our connectivity has increased, our blood flow has increased. So, the University of Adelaide, in fact, discovered that our brain size grew by 350% over human evolution, and our blood flow by 600%. We've got to this point where our brains are good, right? But they're not perfect. They've got some limitations, or what I call suboptimal. And I'm going to share some of these limitations with you. So, first one, prediction. We can't predict the future as of yet, and if you can, please speak to me. I'd love to scan your brains. Knowledge base. So have you heard of a guy called Lawrence Kimpeek? Rain Man? Some of you are nodding. So the movie Rain Man was based on the guy Lawrence Kimpeek, who had exceptional memory. He could read things and memorize them. But we don't have that capability as of yet. And there's a professor from the University of Northwestern University discovered, in fact, that our brain can store about 2.5 petabytes of capacity. So our brains are good at memorizing a few things, but they're still not perfect. Speed, accuracy, trade-off. So if you do something very, very quickly, your accuracy drops. If you do something slowly, you're less error-prone. Right? The only exception to that is if you're trying to hit the snooze button. You're very accurate at that. So there are a few exceptions to the rules. And the last one is cognitive emotional intelligence, or what I like to call unconscious bias. And this is a real hot topic at the moment. So everyone has a bias, right? And there was a test called the implicit association test developed by Harvard University in the 1990s. And you can do this test and it will tell you what your bias is, if you're curious. And biases happen because our brains are trying to process all this information and knowledge. There's so much stimuli in the world that we have to kind of process, from auditory to visual, etc. And so what we do is when we see someone, we put them into buckets, and that's how stereotypes form. And so it's a way for our brains to process information, but it sometimes doesn't really help. And it affects every decision we make in every single possible sector. And being in the HR world, I'm going to share some of that with you. So this is the classic hiring process that a recruiter or a HR manager will go through. They write the job spec, they post it out to all these different sources, collect all the applicants, in their CVs, review them one at a time, right? And there's a saying that recruiters or employers spend 6 seconds per CV. So you've got to be very quick if you want to be shortlisted. Then you do the interview process, and someone's selected. Perfect. But there are all these limitations that I said that interfere with every single step of that process, from how that job description's being written, all the way to where it's being posted, how our brains are reading these CVs, to what we're looking at when we're reading these CVs. And I'm going to share that with you quickly. So we scanned employers' or recruiters' brains for a while, actually, we've been doing that. And we actually monitored also where their eyes were looking when reading CVs, just to see if there's anything interesting on there. And this is the results. So this is a CV, a dummy CV, and red means recruiters or employers spent most of the times on that, and blue means minimal amount of time. So they don't really care about your interests or your hobbies. They're not really bothered about that. But they are interested about your name, your job title, company name, and your location. So if you really want to get attention, just put those information on a piece of paper. That's all you really need. But to be honest, there are other interesting things in a CV that we should look at. And reading someone's name really shouldn't determine if someone's great or is a great applicant or not. It's all these little details about where they've studied or what the details of what they've done when they were working. But it just shows you the power of kind of unconscious biases or biases that people have in the hiring world. So that really does affect diversity numbers in the workforce. So there was something called the implicit association test that I shared with you. And there was something also called the Tech Inclusion Pledge, signed by about 30 plus companies initially, saying that they're going to release their diversity numbers year on year. Now, you can see, for example, Facebook, 68% men, 32% women. Men in tech, 84%, women, 16%. And that isn't just Facebook, it's all the other tech companies as well. And this is just the men to women ratios. But also we can look into actually ethnicity, right? So you can see that Caucasians, for example, in LinkedIn, there's about 53% Caucasians versus how many black they have, so 1%. And that is the case for many of these organizations because diversity numbers are not the greatest at the moment. And so there's a lot of debate and topic about how do we increase diversity in workforce and increase inclusion as well in workforce, because there's a lot of evidence around the benefits around that. So a report from McKinsey said that having a diverse and inclusive team increased sales revenue by 35%. We found out that you have greater kind of outbox thinking, creativity. So the benefits are immense, and a lot of effort is being put at the moment into increasing diversity in workforce. So what we need to start doing is hiring from 100% of the world's talent pool, as opposed to a fraction of it, irrespective of someone's age, gender, sexuality, disability. All of these things shouldn't be taken into account. We need to hire people for good for their job and can prove it. And so what we did is here's a quick video to show demand of talent around the world. So this is initially Africana studies, right? So the demand of Africana studies around the world, animal science. And the interesting one is computer science. You'll see the demand of computer science around the world. Right? So this is why we really need to start hiring people from 100% of the talent pool, because there's a huge need for it. And so what's happening is now that we've got to this point where we've realized that brains have limitations, but they've also got benefits. But there's this whole race of machines versus humans that is going on as well. And so where we kind of come from, where we kind of work on, is we believe that machines are good at some things and we're good at things, and together that's a much more optimal decision-making process. And what we call that is augmented intelligence, as opposed to artificial intelligence. So IA as opposed to AI. And so what we believe in is, how do we use IA to kind of optimize decision-making and increase diversity in workforce, and how can we do that? And so all of a sudden, over the kind of decades, all this technology has started to emerge, from natural language processing, the ability to read text, all the way to core data, the ability to extract information from the web, or machine learning techniques that allow us to learn over time and make decisions that are more accurate. And I hinted on the neuroimaging as well. And so there's lots of data points that we can aggregate and analyze. But what's really interesting is now there's this whole other issue of biases in AI that have just started to emerge of what if we've all got biases, and by building these programs and algorithms, do we instill the biases into these algorithms? And how do we rectify these biases as to kind of prevent that? And there's a lot of research from kind of IBM and other companies trying to solve this exact problem, because you can never get rid of a bias, but you can try and postpone it as long as possible. And this is a kind of a whole world of debate on its own. But just a few techniques I'm going to share with you is, how do we make job descriptions, for example, more neutral, right? So there's a lot of research that says that men will only apply to roles if they feel like they're 100, they can do everything on that box even though they can't. Whereas women only apply if they think that they can tick every single thing on that box. So how do we actually balance that? How do we use natural language processing to kind of balance that out? Or how do you upskill talent? Because I've just shown you kind of the demand of computer science or tech and STEM in the world. So how do we upskill students or children and make sure that they know computer science and learn it from a young age? Scoring algorithms. I shared with you that recruiters or employers spend 6 seconds per CV. But what if a machine was doing that process, right? And it's getting all these judgments and these facts and it's analyzing it as opposed to us. Would that have a better process in removing biases? Or anonymizing CV. So I shared with you that kind of the diagram of where recruiters or employers' eyes are looking in CVs. What if we anonymize components of the CVs that are associated to biases? If we took someone's name out, or their age, or what university they went to, does that make it an equal playing field? And there's all these techniques that allow us to kind of unleash potential. So I know I've talked about a lot of things, but just to wrap it up. So our brains are good, but they're not perfect. There are things that we can do to increase diversity in workforce, and it's a big hot topic at the moment. And there's different types of algorithms out there that are associated to biases in AI and ways that we can potentially rectify it to increase diversity in workforce, but most importantly, to unleash human potential. Thank you.
Thank you. So right now I'm going to invite the speakers to the stage for our discussion. At the end we'll open it up to audience questions, but for now I'm going to corral them over here. And now that all of you have sat down, I am going to ask the first question, is that how did all of you get into your work? Because it's wild, it's varied. Lisa, how did you sort of get into what you do?
So I went on my year abroad in Canada, and I thought about what am I going to do in life, because you don't really think that far as a student. And I thought that I like museums, but they're difficult, and I think it's a hidden institution. You don't really know what's going on, how do you get hired, how do you get work experience. So I spent a good part of my third year volunteering, which is not the only way to get into museums, by the way. And then I got a traineeship at Orleans House Gallery, and I got some experience for 6 months there, and that allowed me to get my job at the Science Museum.
And Segun, how about you?
I had my degree in computer science, and when I got my PhD, so I wanted to do something that really touches my heart, and I was looking for something that will touch the life of people, directly touch the life of people. I was really frustrated doing something that is abstract, so I went to the US to do what is called bioinformatics, and came to the UK to do human genetics. So I think that what I'm doing now have direct impact in the life of people.
And so both of you seem to have quite an idea of sort of what you wanted and how you wanted to get there. Riham, how about you? Was it sort of as clear?
It started off as clean cut as that, ended up elsewhere.
It's a Black History Month event. They're trying to silence us.
Yeah. I think it's the word clean cut. So I was doing a PhD at Oxford, and that was what I thought my trajectory was going to be. I wanted to be a lecturer, professor in that sector, and I thought nothing in this world will ever stop me from doing that. And the one thing I said I'll never become is a businesswoman or an entrepreneur. Look at where I am right now. So the process was just because of a friend of mine, his name is Vivek, and he was like, I want to get a job at Microsoft. How do I do that? And Microsoft gets a lot of applicants to try and become software developers or engineers. And we thought there must be another way to go through that hiring process without having to put an application form in. And so we spent about a weekend building his CV, and we put it up as a kind of an app. And we put it up on the Windows Store, and initially got rejected. Microsoft were like, this sucks. There's no real purpose of Vivek's CV here at all. So we went back to the drawing board, and we let other people edit and put their own CVs in a kind of like CV in a pocket situation. And then we kind of got about 50,000 downloads in a few weeks, and it was climbing 100 a day. And I didn't notice at all because I was doing my research, right? I'm trying to be a lecturer. And all of a sudden we get called into kind of Microsoft's office, and this is exactly what we wanted to do. This is the whole point of why we were here. And then we started looking into the HR world and realized how fragmented it was. And so we've kind of felt there's a responsibility to try and rectify and change that. But my aim was never, ever to be a businesswoman.
I'm glad that you fell into success.
Thank you.
Accidentally. Please teach me your ways. So I suppose my general question again to all of you, when you've spoken about sort of whitewashing history, the biases in genetics and the biases in hiring and sort of going forward, is how did this issue really arise? And Segun, I want to start with you. Like, how did this bias happen?
So when you look at the statistics that I gave, and then you look at what is happening now, given how you feel when you hear that 38 billion people are killed because of non-communicable disease, and you have the skill to make a contribution to that. You see, so I think that motivates me. If I have some skill, if I can do something about it, if nobody does anything about it, the figure will keep on increasing every year and every year and every year. So I had some skill in programming and computer science, and I can use that to find what is called drug target and be able to do whatever thing I can do. So I feel that I should use my skill to make an impact in the world that I live.
So I think, Lisa, one of the most interesting things you sort of showed was when you typed in influential scientists, and it looked like every science book I've ever seen ever in my life. So how, you touched on it a bit, but how did this cycle begin of just museums and other sectors just whitewashing history just again and again and again to where we are now?
I think it was based on an initial idea of whiteness as seen as the norm, and because whiteness is constructed as the norm, and there's been very little room for other people to not only just contribute to that history but rewrite that history, it's just continued over time to the point that we're having this conversation and this event today. But also, when you do speak to other people that work within museums and science, they don't understand that this is a legacy of whiteness being seen as the norm. So if that's the benchmark, those images. So if that benchmark has been established for more than 200 years, it's very difficult for some people to not see that as the norm. So when something that's different, or someone that's different that doesn't look like that, you're seen as the odd one out, when really the odd one out is the normalizing theory of whiteness as the norm in itself.
So with both of you, sort of Segun, Riham, it's sort of something similar. You talk about whiteness being the norm, because you spoke about sort of CVs and people, where they look at the name first and foremost. Yeah. I'm very lucky, my name's Alex Lathbridge. It means I get to the interview stage after the Skype call. And would you say that it's the same thing, whiteness being the norm, both in genetics and in sort of CV
several studies have shown that being a scientist means being white, being male, and being middle class. And that's been the norm. So when I introduce myself to people, and they say, "What do you do?" and I say, "I'm a scientist," you see the feeling in their face, like, You see, what kind of scientist are you? Because especially people like me that have got what is called accent. Yeah, so they look at you and they say, "How can you be a scientist?" You see, because they are expecting somebody like, I showed a picture of Freddie Sanger, who is very well known to be a scientist. So that has been the norm, and that must change.
So, Riam, especially with your work, sort of looking at all of these hiring practices and everything, it's that thread of whiteness being the norm, especially when you spoke about the difference between men and women in hiring, but still people are looking at, you said, names and where people have studied in their current jobs. Is it still the fact that whiteness is the norm?
Yes, is the answer. The issue is the way a CV is laid out doesn't help the hiring process whatsoever. At the moment, the way a CV is laid out is the name is at the very top, right? Then you put your address, then your telephone number, right? And then your email address if they haven't got your name the first time, right? And then if it's a senior role, you put your kind of the companies you've worked with and then your education, or vice versa. And the way it's laid out is the first thing you are drawn to is the name. Now, technically, that shouldn't be the case because your name shouldn't matter. It's can you do the job or not? So why is it there in the first place? It makes no sense. What you should be putting is what you've done in the first place. And I'm a real believer that the way the HR world needs to change is we shouldn't even be having CVs, to be honest. Because if we remove that, what is the alternative? And the alternative is to prove you can do the job, right? And that takes away that piece of paper. If you can prove that you're talented and gifted, why shouldn't you get the job? And so it removes your name, it removes doesn't matter where you are in this world. That's why the whole gig economy really works well. Freelancers, because it doesn't matter if you're in the UK or Australia, if you can do the job, you can do the job. And I think that's what it should always come down to in the hiring world. And until we kind of change that piece of paper, I think we're going to be kind of stuck in this position. And I think it's also the same case in entrepreneurship. If you did that Google search of entrepreneurs, you're going to get the Steve Jobs, you're going to get the Elon Musks, and that's it. And so it's just the way the world has kind of progressed and kind of history. But I think it's got to the point where technology can really make a shift and really help us in kind of rebalancing things.
So, I mean, from that, we can sort of say what's happening now with that. And there's a very good understanding of, if you weren't doing what you're doing now, how things would be. But, Segun, when you've spoken about sort of genetic data especially, it's what would the world be like if we weren't making those inroads with looking at sort of genome-wide studies in Black Africans and other populations? What would the effects on society be if we just stuck to the normal sort of European genetic data?
Now, from what I show you, you can see we are now in the era of what is called genomic medicine. So where you will go to the doctor and your genetic information will be used for diagnosis and treatment. And now what that means is that for all the studies that have been done in the European population, it does not translate to other ethnic group. Now, for example, if you know somebody that have diabetes, they will tell you that your HbA1c is 6.5.
What's that?
HbA1c, that's what the test they do to say whether you have diabetes or not. So if it's 6.5, you have diabetes. If it's less than 6.5, you don't have diabetes. And that is just a threshold across board for everybody. So what I'll show today is that will change. And the same thing also with BMI. BMI, if you go to the doctor, they tell you if you have BMI that is more than 30, or it means that you are obese. And that doesn't, you cannot use the same culture for people of European population and African population because we are different. So what our study is showing is that we have to use different cutoff and different tools to diagnose and treat people.
Wow. And just before I jump onto Lisa, does that mean... Well, it was for me speaking, so I assume... So thank you, lone person. That's really helped my ego. So does that mean it's sort of why, if you do those consumer genetic testing, it's why it's sort of not very accurate for people of non-European descent?
Yeah, it will be accurate because we, although any two human being, we are 99% identical in our genetic, but the 0.1% is a lot. And that's what determines why I have the color of eyes that I have, and you have the color of eyes that you have. And that's very, very important. So in the future, the kind of medication that you prescribe to somebody like me that is black might be different from the kind of medication you prescribe to somebody that is white.
Okay. And Lisa, like, it's sort of on a similar thread where Segun's talked about the future sort of medicine. With things like the whitewashing of history, especially in museums, if these things don't change, like what would society look like? Because you work in the Science Museum, ostensibly one of the biggest science institutions in London, if not the UK, if not the world. Present institutions excluded. So what would it be like if there weren't inroads being made in combating that whitewashing?
Museums would become irrelevant because there's only so much that history can repeat itself. I mean, I know when certain people I know that's the reason why a lot of people do not go into museums in the first place, because they don't see anything that reflects them. And as an institution that is for the public, in which the public has entrusted us to look after collections and develop programs for education, if it just continues to be a permanent exhibition in which it's just white people and there are pockets of black people, but it's the same black people, and that's due to not really thinking about what else is there. And that reflects in what Raheem was saying about who's being hired in these positions, because it's the same people that are in the same positions that have the same mindset, which means nothing really changes because no one new or no one different is in those positions to make those decisions to make it relevant. Like I said, I found 2 people on Twitter. So when you tell me that you can't find any information about black scientists contributing to current science, you're lying, because they're out there. You choose you don't want to look for them, or that's it, you don't want to look for them. So if you want to remain relevant, you need to open up to people that are not just white people, basically. That's what's going to happen if you don't. You're not going to be relevant, and then what's the point of museums in existence?
As someone that loves museums, I really hope, those changes are made, and especially when, it's Black History Month, we're looking at, there are, from history in the British Empire, there are so many different figures that people are starting to unearth or really make public, especially black figures. And so I think it would be very interesting to see how museums change and, if the hiring process is any better or if scientists are, any more diverse, if there will be sort of no pushback. And, we've all talked about these big blue sky things, how things can change, but realistically, how do you all think that things can change on a societal level? So hiring bias or bias in genomic data or sort of institutions being incredibly whitewashed. It's all well and good, each of you doing something different and calling these things out, but how can it change on a societal level? Lisa.
I think we need to be honest with ourselves and not take criticism, because critique is good, not take it personally, because I'm not attacking you, I'm not attacking the institution per se. A lot of people are questioning, and if you don't like the question, it's not the question that's at fault, it's your response to that question. Either you're feeling a type of way about someone asking a question that you feel uncomfortable answering, or there's greater truth to that question which you don't want to face. And things aren't going to get better if you keep hiding under the sand, because, you know, life goes on. You need to address things, and you need to address it in a way that's actually going to progress to somewhere. Like, what is the point of this? Why are we doing this? How do we get from here to here? There's no good having 10 billion meetings about diversity. Nothing's going to happen at the end of those meetings. What's the point?
So to jump off of that, you know, like you're saying, people talking about diversity all the time. In the hiring practice, the hiring world, the things that you're doing and your company doing to change that, but, you know, you are one company. In the perfect world, you know, you'd be the new Google. But before that happens, I mean, how can we change things in the hiring world on a societal level?
Good question. So I'm a firm believer of innovation can come from anyone, really, right? Ideas can come from anyone. Doesn't matter if you're black, white, yellow, pink. It doesn't matter if you're, you know, 2 foot tall or, you know, a giant. It doesn't matter. And I think that's the first discussion a lot of people have to have. But there's this big gap between the education sector and the employment sector. We usually think of them as two separate institutions or departments, but they're not. It's a continuous process. And that's the same within the hiring world, where people think acquiring talent and retaining them are separate. But in fact, they're continuous. It's one continuous cycle. And so if we don't have, you know, the education sector, if that doesn't improve, you know, there's a big talk around, you know, schools kills creativity, right? And I think there's a lot of changes in multiple angles that we need to kind of address in order to kind of change that. So, for example, so I went to kind of, I went to the Oxford, right? But if you look at my history, you would have thought, no way in a million years this girl would go to Oxford. And that's just purely from the background. You'll think, no, there's no point. I went to one of the worst schools kind of in secondary school. It wasn't the brilliant, it got closed down. And so you think, okay, that's my chance, it's gone. And the thing is, you drive and you push yourself. And I think I really want to encourage everyone else to do the same, right? If you have any great ideas, push them forwards, right? And like you said, keep going. You just got to keep going, or kind of like Dory says, just keep swimming. You've just got to go, right? Otherwise, we can't just do it as one person or two. It has to be a group movement. And us just being here right now really opens up the floor, I think, and really does change the dynamics of how we can change society.
Well, that was amazing.
Oh, thank you.
Now, Segun, I come to you finally with this idea of how you can change things on a massive societal level, primarily because of the graph you showed about sort of the two graphs about the fact that institutions during 2013 to 2015 didn't hire any black academics, and then showing the sort of changes in sort of black and minority ethnic people from education to the very end. How can this change on a massive societal level? Because, you know, you are one man, fellow like black academics are one person at a time, but how can this change massively outside of, you know, diversity initiatives that some have said do not work at all?
I wouldn't say that.
No?
Yeah, it doesn't work really.
Well, we can explore that later, but how do you think this can change, especially within science?
I think the policymakers have a lot to do. You know, in this country, we talk a lot about equality and diversity, but in reality, we tend to focus more on people that already have a lot of opportunities, and we tend to give them more opportunities. And you know, every time here, if you listen to the TV, you say there's shortage of engineers, there's shortage of scientists, there's shortage of. So why are you not employing those people that already have the degree? And you know, everything is not always about the hard skills. There are also the soft skills, the passion and the motivation. People can be trained. You know, the gap can be filled. So, like I showed a picture of equality. Somebody that does not match up because we feel that they have some gap. Why not help them to step up? So why keep on saying there's shortage and there's shortage? So I think there's need for us to work more on the policy and help people that have, maybe they have issue with their background or with their education and all that, to come up, if they are motivated.
So I think I touched on something when I said diversity doesn't work at all, or diversity things don't work at all. Diversity works. I'd say, you know, you have an idea that perhaps that's not the case, me saying such broad strokes that diversity initiatives don't work.
I think not all of them work, but it doesn't mean that not all of them don't work. I think it depends on the approach being taken by those that are setting out these diversity plans. So if the approach is just a tick boxing exercise, wow. If that's the case, then it's not going to work. But if it's really to provide equity, like Segun spoke about, then that's when it really can work. And I don't want to dim the light on those opportunities and those initiatives that do exist, because they do and they are very good, but it's not something where I would want to say that they all work.
So all of you have spoken about, you know, processes that perhaps might take time. We've talked about on a societal level, but in your day-to-day life, you know, talking about whitewashing, talking about achievements, talking about hiring practices, have you had any specific pushback, and sort of what has that been like? Because the idea that people perhaps want to change biases or want to go against what is seen as normal, and we've heard what normal perhaps means, have you had any specific instances where people have pushed back against this idea? Let's start with you.
Yes and no. So for me personally, for example, I'm one of those people who've played with Lego and Barbies at the same time, so I've never got to the point where I thought, okay, this is due to what bias or anything like that. It's because I've just been blind to it, really. Being, in schools, one of the few BAME female students, okay, that's fine. Then you go to university and same things happen. Okay, and then again, you go become an entrepreneur, same thing, and you just become oblivious to it. You just become numb, and you don't notice it. So you can't sit there and say, oh, this is because I was a kind of female entrepreneur, or because I'm black, or because I'm female. You just don't think of it like that. But I had an interesting conversation recently where it kind of got me riled up, because biases still do exist. And it's the discussion around, certain companies only hire from certain universities, right? There are tons of universities out there in the UK and worldwide, but they always pick from kind of top Ivy League universities and exclude others. And that makes no sense to me, because I still do believe talent can come from anywhere. Just because you didn't go to an Ivy League, why shouldn't you be given an equal chance as everyone else? Because talent could be at non-Ivy League universities. It just doesn't make any sense. And it's having those discussions and making sure that people are aware of that. And kind of in our company, we've hired people from non-Ivy League universities, and they're brilliant. And the thing is that I wish everyone thought like that. And I kind of wish everyone was more kind of inclusive in that workforce. And it's, how do we try and instill that in everyone else? And it is because we have unconscious biases. And it is, educating is one thing, and we can, like you said, keep having those discussions, but now we need to do something about it. So we need to turn it into action, and try and kind of change these biases and the perceptions in kind of the education world, in the employment world, and other sectors as well. It's a good thing, just seeing that graph, I thought, phew, I did not go into academia, because I would not be on that percentage. So it's kind of really kind of interesting to kind of see from that angle. I can get used to these claps, thank you.
So, Segun, as someone who went into academia, when you talk about the things that you've raised, have you had any pushback? Like you mentioned that when you came from Nigeria and went to Germany, you had those biases that people might think that you can't use a computer. I find that very weird. And so, how in your life, further than that, how have you seen pushback or to the idea that perhaps things require changing?
I think over the years, I've learned that you have to keep on pushing forward. You see, everybody has their own challenges, even including the white people. Personally, I didn't study in the UK. I had my first degree, my second degree, and my third degree in Nigeria. And ordinarily, when you go for interview, or if you have opportunity to go for interview, you see, the people look down on you. But you have the opportunity to prove yourself over and over. If other people are working like 100%, you know that you have to work 200%. You have to do more. You have to do more and keep on doing more until you're able to prove to people that you're able to do it. So it doesn't matter whatever challenges that you face, you just keep on going until you achieve what you want to achieve.
And I suppose the last sort of question before I open it to the floor for questions is, you work in an institution like the Science Museum and you're talking about whitewashing when you perhaps one of the few people in the institution who are black or ethnic minority. Have you had pushback? You might not be able to name specific things because this is going on YouTube. And I want to keep you in a job.
I hope so. I would say the main pushback is me actually being there and other people, like my friends as well, just being there. Because if you weren't there, who would be there that's black or another ethnic minority? And I think that's really important because we are part of the population, so in institutions like that, we need to be reflected. And it's really important to acknowledge that, because without that inclusion of people that are part of the population, how do you expect to communicate with audiences that are also part of that population?
And then, I suppose this is more of a question for Segun and yourself. Do you ever find that so tiring?
Tiring being one of the only people there.
That, plus having to go the extra mile, especially, you're an assistant curator. Mm-hmm. That's your job.
Yeah.
And so having to do this extra bit where you have to be, constantly thinking about combating this whitewashing of history, especially in science, is that not ever feel like too much? Or like, you've got the burden on your shoulders?
I think that burden is there every day because we live in a world that not even what am I saying? It actually actively goes out to try and break you down every day. So going into work it's nothing new. It's just something different. Someone may not be, someone may not punch me in the face at work. but
I hope not.
I hope so too.
Go to HR.
But what I'm saying is that there are different nuances in how people decide to treat you, and it's just it's not always going to be overt, but it's just you understand that as a person of colour because it happens in any type of space that you go into. Like Raheem said, secondary school, university. You're in these institutions, and you're coming in, and people perceive you to be as different. You may not even be that different, but these are people's perceptions. I can't change them. But what I can do is just understand that this potentially may happen because I'm in another space, and you're just, like I said, being there is the first step. So, yeah, being there and being there with my friends who are also black or other ethnic minorities, that's just, really, really helpful.
So right now I'm going to open it up to audience questions. We've got 2 stewards coming around with microphones. So if you have any questions, they'll be able to give them to you. So anyone, Got one at the front. Oh, and please state who it's to, otherwise you get all of them asking. Well, maybe that's what you want.
My question is to Segun. That was an astonishing figure. You said 0% BME in management positions in universities. Well, I find it astonishing because you've heard of the Wiseman Professor Black movement on the humanities side, and they're quite depressed with there's so few black professors in history. There's so few. But whether there's none, there's something fundamentally wrong there. There is. So look, I was intrigued by your figure there of 20%, which is twice the national average, was in the career. You're only 10% in jobs. So I would put the 10% in the job, what are they doing to help the 10% who aren't in a job?
That looks like a very difficult question.
Can I help? Okay, two things. Take the humanities. They were very aggressive. You know, roads must fall. You've heard of roads must fall? Okay. It's extraordinary. The fact that they had a great campaign. It started in South Africa, going to pull down the road statues. They were against road scholarship, wanted to rename. They were quite vigorous in the decolonializing the curriculum. They were really active in terms of fighting their cause. Yeah. So I would put it to you, you need to address this. Maybe we should discuss this offline. Maybe we should get some models from the humanities. But then going back to the 10% who are working, what do they form? Mentoring groups? They're kind of, and vigorous, aggressive mentoring groups.
The people, you can only do what you are able to do, what is in your capacity to do. Yeah. If you don't have opportunity to something, you are not able to do what you actually want to do. So I think you can only do what you is in your capacity to do. I think it's a shame that we, for 3 consecutive years, we don't have black people in management. Maybe if you have some, maybe if you have 10%, maybe you have 20%, maybe they will be able to bring up other people that are below the ladder.
Yes, but just to follow on to that, you talked about mentoring groups, right? But do you think that it would be the job of these people, these 10-20% who are in there, to do this? Because when you look at mentoring groups now, they come from when you have a large majority of people there. So wouldn't you say it's sort of a numbers game? Or
there's mentorship at every category. For example, you can be a PhD supervisor and mentor other people. But what I'm saying is that if you're not in some capacity, you're not able to do anything. Yeah, it's when you have capacity to pull people up that you'll be able to pull people up. If you're not able to pull people up, you by find yourself also down.
Do we have next question? Oh, up here. Up, all the way up?
Up there, right? Yeah.
Oh, all the way up, right.
Yeah.
I forgot there was an up.
Hello. Oh. Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Vivian. Thank you so much, panelists, for all your honesty. I think my question is to Reham because I can relate. I've been in HR for the last decade, and I did a master's degree here, even though my first degree was in Nigeria. So I've had to sort of navigate my career by myself, and outside of work I help people of color to sort of get into that career ladder, whatever they want to do. I guess my question to you is, you mentioned the nameless CV piece around the unconscious bias, and this is something that I help business leaders do and recruiters as well. But in the last 10 years I probably have worked in 7 companies, and I've only seen one who was trialing the whole nameless CV piece just to increase, not necessarily people of black and ethnic minority, but the female part of the diversity spectrum. If I've moved 7 companies in 10 years, it means I wasn't there long enough to see the outcome. So I guess my question is, who's taking this up? Which industry is kind of being brave and bold and going against unconscious bias and being practical? Or is it still a myth? Is it never going to happen yet?
The answer is the tech sector. and consultancy. You're completely right, the whole unconscious bias correction on CV anonymizing has only started to become a hype now, only because these diversity reports get put out on the media every single year now, and the numbers don't change. And then we're seeing that on social media, on the news, and we're saying, why is the numbers not changing? Why are the numbers not changing? We've been asking this question year on year. And companies are starting to get worried because they're saying, okay, people have started realizing the reports haven't varied at all. We need to try and solve this. And so as a result of that, a lot of people are hiring diversity and inclusion members, or taking people in the HR department to get involved in that, to actually get to try and solve these challenges in diversity in workforce, specifically in the tech sector. And so they've started to, I've seen a lot of consultancy firms starting doing this anonymizing technique. Other techniques, which brings the point about mentoring, started doing mentorship with schools as well. You're completely right, initially it was around kind of female founders, because females are kind of 50% of that talent pool. And it's the initial easiest challenge to solve first, and then work on the others. And so it's only over the past couple of years that this kind of bubble has started to expand and become of interest. Before that, not that much, to be honest, but it's prominently most in the tech sector that I've seen it emerge.
Thank you for your question. Do we have more? We've got one there. And then one there.
So I think we can all agree that it would be much more valuable to have much more audiences like this audience at RI Talks. They are mostly white, male, middle-class audiences, and I think it would be brilliant to start changing that. So I guess question to any of you, how do you think we could go about doing that, getting institutions like the RI to open up things like their science talks to a more diverse audience and getting more minorities into spaces like this?
I think we are here today saying this shows that things have really improved. 100 years ago, you dare not say what we are saying now. Yeah. So I think what we would do at our individual university, just to continue speaking up and creating more awareness about this.
I'll add to that. I'll add to that. I think if institutions want to increase the diversity of their audiences, first they actually have to want to do that. And if they do want to do that and they're struggling to reach out to audiences, you need to speak to people, because how many people know this space even exists? You've got to be honest with that, because if people don't know something, they don't know that you're trying to do something progressive. So you need to make those connections, and you need to speak to people, because they're the ones that can give you those type of answers. And really you can go from there, but you need to get that basic right.
I was going to say, if every single one of us right now took out our phone and messaged at least 10 people they knew about and told them about the Royal Institution and talks like this, you can really spread the message, right? There's several hundred of us right now. We could easily just do that. And I think that will instantly change the demographics. And if those 10 people told another 10 people, then we've got a wave, right? And I think that's the way to move forward. And it is just about the power of connections, telling about people, about things and talks that are interesting. But if we just all right now took one step and just messaged 10 people right now, then I think we've made a movement.
I mean, that would be the weirdest group chat ever.
Well, I would love it. It would be amazing.
We had one question in the middle. Yeah. Just there. You've got to understand the lights here. I can't see anyone.
Hi. I think there's going to be a bit of overlap with the last question, but I wanted to ask Lisa something about diversity initiatives. So you said that some were successful and some weren't. So I wondered what was common among those that do work in your experience.
That's something I need to think about. I think the ones that do work are the ones in which from the beginning, diversity and inclusion was embedded in that program. So it's not an add-on at the end where you're thinking, oh, to secure this funding, I need to make sure that I've got X amount of Black and minority ethnic people coming to X, Y, or Z. So if it's in the beginning, so you've established that's something that you want to achieve, you need to go out and find that. Because if you don't do that, at the end of the program, when your funding is being evaluated by external evaluators, it doesn't make sense because you're running around to try and prove something that you didn't even do properly in the first place. So it's more building in programs that incorporate that at the core in order to go forward, because those people, they will come because they are there and it's another opportunity for them to apply for, but it's got to be embedded because you can smell it from a mile away when it's just a tick-booking exercise. But what's really sad is that because people need jobs and experiences, they will do it. And who gets the credit? The institution of the company, even if it's done unethically and incorrectly, but it doesn't matter what the evaluation says, because if it's not embedded as something that's important to the organization, it's going to continue time and time again. And there have been like traineeships where that's happened, and in one sense, the traineeship looks amazing. You talk to the people that undertook that traineeship, they're telling me a different story. They don't match up. Why is that?
So before we have another question, I just want to explore that a bit more. When we talk about diversity and we talk about racial diversity, we always sort of lump together BME, BAME. I didn't become BAME until I left my house and went to university. Do you find that with all of the areas that you work in, that lumping together of everyone who's not white poses its own problems?
That's the case if we think of it like that, and if we want to think of it like that. I've never considered it to be the case. So being a kind of female entrepreneur, you go to all these networking events and you talk to lots of people, and I could walk in and initially be very shy and hesitate to talk to people and think, where are the other female entrepreneurs, or where are the other BAME people at? I need you, right? And if I thought like that, then it becomes kind of a vicious cycle in your mind that you'll always associate these networking events trying to find other female entrepreneurs that are like you. And the thing is that inclusion shouldn't be about finding people that are like you. It's about finding people that are not like you, because that's how kind of new ideas and thoughts come about. And so what you should do is you should go to the complete opposite of what you look like or what you think you look like and speak to them, because that's how new ideas form and new discussions. It might not be the exact opinion you think is the same, but you'll learn a lot more that way than if thinking, I need to find someone that's like me. Thank
you. Okay, so I think also that we should look at, if you want to be truly successful, we should look beyond our color and our race. Many of times we mix up discrimination with where we are not truly good enough. So we must recognize, we must be able to differentiate when we need to improve ourselves and when we are being discriminated against. So we should not just lump everything together and say it is discrimination. So because excellence is excellent. When you are good, you are good. Nobody looks at your color, whether you are black or you are white. So we should try to improve ourselves and look beyond our color or our race. Yeah.
Smashing. You can clap without me. What are you, Lisa?
I think that there is a tendency to lump Black and ethnic minorities together. I think it's even foreign for me saying that, because when I have a chat with my friend, I don't even like that term. But I think there is a reason why it's been done, because it's easier to look at a group, even if it's a smaller group of people, and assign certain expectations, stereotypes, etc. But I think within that group, you shouldn't just think that they are just a homogenous group. There are differences within that, because not all people of colour are the same. So I think I understand why it's used. I may not always agree with its use, but don't think that because black and ethnic minorities are grouped together, we are one group that is just the same.
Again, if you'd like to clap, don't have to wait for me. We had one question in the middle. We'll come to you.
Yeah, I just had two questions. So the first question, how significant do you think films like The Hidden Figures was to shining the light on black people in science?
I think that's a really good question. I think it's really interesting because it just visualized what a lot of people know happened and happens continuously. And what I mean by that is the achievements of black people deliberately being hidden, omitted, and erased from history. So why does it take a film how many years later to commemorate that? It doesn't make sense, but the point that I'm making here is that happened, it happened, and you need to understand that when that happens, people get angry and annoyed because despite people's excellence being excellence, why are their achievements still being hidden? It needs to be understood that, it's not. As someone that looks for, films are a good way to find inspiration, and if those inspirations are not being shown, unjustly so, that has an impact on how other people view themselves. So I think those are really important representations because they were doing excellent things at a time where every single social, racial, gender issue was thrown at them, and they were still excellent, and they still didn't get their due congratulations until how many years later. And I think that's, whilst it is a cause for celebration, it's a cause to be critical of that. Why is that? And why do we allow that to continue to happen? Because it shouldn't be 10, 20 years later since an event happened that we should be commemorating it. It should be commemorated because those people were excellent regardless. So I think it's really important to not just look at that as a celebration, but look at it more deeply on what happens when you do hide things and histories for no good reason.
And just another, sorry.
Yeah, you had a second question.
Yeah, I was just going to say, in response to what you were saying, how do you take these events past Black History Month? Because every year you get events like this, and it's for 1 month, and then everyone forgets for 11 months. So what are we going to do? Or what are you going to do?
Good question. I think it's really important to think about what can we all do, if this is important to you, because it's important to me, what can we all do to ensure that whatever it is that you think you're doing to improve, whether it's diversity or just understanding or awareness or something, I think you should just try and do it in your everyday and just think about sometimes what you can do rather than looking at what other people or other institutions can do. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue talking, I'm going to look at my own networks and just try and remind people, because history is my passion, and remind people that history is not boring, it's not irrelevant, you need to understand it to go forward. And maybe if it's someone like me saying it compared to someone else that just decides to focus on a history that is looking at things from a negative always, it's about the approach. So if I can convince one person that history is not boring, I feel like I've done something good, and especially Black history as well, because that has a lot of negative connotations attached to that. But I don't want to think, and I don't want other people to think, for example, that Black history started with slavery, because it didn't, despite what the public school curriculum likes to tell you. So if that's one thing I can say, then that's one of the things that I'll do.
And so with both of you, how do you feel about this question of expanding it?
Yeah, in my presentation, I show that most of the studies that have been done using the what I call this fantastic scientific approach called GWAS has been done in the European population. So we did GWAS in 14,000 people. So what we are going to do now is that we are going to do GWAS in 100,000 Black participants. So that will change what we know. Already we have 96% in 2009 and 81% in 2016. Maybe the next 2 years or 3 years, you'll see that gap continue to melt down, because we are going to continue to do research in other minority so that the genomic medicine will be beneficial to all.
How do I answer this? So I try to do a few things to try and kind of combat this. So I give a lot of talks, for example, at schools. Beyond that, I've done mentoring as well. So I've had so many students, for example, or kind of secondary school children that say, or A-levels that say, I really want to do computer science, but I only studied law and economics, and they panic. I'm thinking, you don't need to, you can still get into coding, right? It's not just a one-way process. There are other opportunities. And so I do a lot of mentoring around that, giving people tours. I've also I've created a Women in Tech network and Female Founders network on LinkedIn to try and get people to share their success stories. Last weekend, I was part of this initiative kind of called the I Am Here, where you dress up as your work kind of process, and then I dressed up as a stereotype, and can't wait for the results of that, because the stereotype will be hilarious. But I try and kind of push myself and try and share my story as much as possible with others, just purely because it's not the stereotypical route that most people would think. People, where I grew up, most people think, okay, there's no way she's going to succeed. That is it. That's, she's not going to become a neuroscientist, or she's not going to be in tech. And by breaking those stereotypes and sharing that with people, I think that's the way we drive forward. And everyone has a stereotype that they've broken, 100%, and we just got to share that. And if we do that, then I'm sure the movement of expanding beyond Black History Month will grow.
So we don't have time for any more questions, primarily because our panel gave such amazing detailed answers, but I'm sure you're going to be sticking around afterwards. Yeah? So for everyone, you are now. Peer pressure. So for all of you who had your hands up, you can feel free to ask them. But as we close, I'd like to say that this has been a really illuminating event, and I've heard so many different viewpoints and how it's being applied in lots of different areas. And so I'm really confident that things are going to change, and they are going to change wider than Black History Month. So I would like to join you in thanking all of our speakers and the RI